So let me, well, I guess I got to do my safe harbor. I think that SanDisk and us, we have the same attorneys. So the lawyers have told me to tell you that I'll be making forward-looking statements and not to believe anything that I say. So this being a technology conference, well, first off, let me give you a little bit of background about Western Digital. We've changed a lot over the years. So Western Digital today is the world's largest provider of digital data storage devices, primarily through spinning disks or hard disk drives. We're the largest hard disk drive manufacturer in the world. And we're also, not everybody may know it, we're also a leading provider of enterprise class solid state drives as well. So this being a technology conference, we always have to have lots of acronyms. But what I'm going to do through this presentation is really kind of simplify it all for us and really talk about what this is about. So one of the things that we fundamentally believe, and I think it's very important to keep in mind, is that technology is essentially an enabler. And, you know, we heard from Mark when he was talking about Citrix, and in effect, Citrix is enabling different kind of experiences in terms of how people interact with different things. And that's really the way that we look at things at Western Digital. And if you look at, people talk about the three platforms of data. And I think it's very interesting to think about how the use and the nature of data has changed over time. If you go back several years ago, actually when I graduated from college in 1985, and computing systems were primarily used for transactional kinds of things, ERP kind of systems. And that was really the start of basic kind of data and basic systems that we were looking at. And then as things progressed, it began to focus on, in terms of efficiencies or in terms of communications and that sort of thing, whether it be email or what have you. Now the way that, and we've heard this really throughout the day in terms of what people have talked about, if you look at the way we're using data today, and even Hillary Clinton, who I thought was very interesting to hear her talk about technology, really spoke about this in terms of how the use of data, whether it be in terms of big data analytics, either is or will potentially impact what's happening from a medical field perspective. I think it's quite fascinating in terms of what's happening. And data in terms of how we're interacting, whether it be at a personal level or at a professional level, commercial or otherwise, is really changing everything that we do, both in a good way and also in terms of in a less positive way, talking about NSA and things like that. And so our challenge as an infrastructure provider is to make sure that we are providing the right kind of storage solutions to the industry to further enhance and enable and improve the utilization of data. So when I talk to our employees and when we talk to our different partners, really what we're trying to do is to continue that virtuous cycle of wanting people to create more and more data, to derive more and more value from that. And that's certainly virtuous from our perspective, because the more data that gets created, of course, the more data that has to be stored, and then accordingly more devices that you need to buy from Western Digital. So I think we're all well versed, and in fact Sanjay from SanDisk, he had a different number, and I like his number better than my number, but you know, the amount of data that either is being created or will be creating is quite mind-blowing. We estimate that by 2020, that the amount of data that is created and stored will be 10x of what it is or what it was last year in 2013. So massive growth from that perspective. That represents 1.7 megabytes of data per person per minute for everybody on the globe in terms of the amount of data that will be created. A fascinating number when you think about it. Sanjay said there will be 75 million connected devices by 2020. We have 30 million. Again, I like Sanjay's better than our number, his number better than our number. And obviously a lot of those devices are things like cell phones and tablets, which in many ways a lot of us have viewed those as primarily consumption devices as opposed to data creation devices. Now, of course, they are consumption devices, but we estimate that these connected devices will create 10% of all data that gets created by 2020. And so the volume of data, whether it be, you know, my kids this weekend were doing the Ice Bucket Challenge, and they tried to get me to do it as well. And they were videoing themselves, right? So the amount of data that people create on these devices will continue to increase. So there are several challenges that we see by virtue of all this data that is being created. The first thing is just simply the diversity of the data. Not only the diversity in terms of the type of data. And again, if you go back to that progression of what's happened from a data systems perspective, used to be that transaction systems created data within server kinds of systems. Now we've got data being created across a variety of different devices that are unstructured in some cases, data or structured data coming in from various different places. And what we as a company have to do is provide a set of solutions from a storage device perspective that enable that data to be captured in the most efficient way. And so what we've assembled is, as I commented earlier, we certainly have a full portfolio of spinning disk products, but we also are a market leader. In fact, we lead in terms of market share for enterprise class SSDs for SAS interface, and we also have a leading position in terms of PCIe. Additionally, once you get that data or that data is collected, the ingestion of that into storage systems is changing. Again, if you go back to the way that data was created in the past, where it usually was through various different transaction systems, servers with storage attached directly to that, what's happening now is data is being ingested into systems in terms of directly into cloud-based systems in what, let's call it, a non-traditional way. A lot of people have talked about energy use, data centers. Data centers use an incredible amount of power, incredible amount of energy. And so what we've done is devised or designed specific cloud-based storage systems that help to not only increase the amount of capacity per footprint or rack, but also that reduce power consumption significantly. We're the only company right now that has helium-sealed drives, helium being the lightest element on the Earth, that allow for not only higher capacity drives, but also less friction and less drag from an energy perspective. The other thing is that, and this is a very interesting notion, the longevity of data. And what I mean by that is that, again, if you go back to transaction systems, you would process transactions through an ERP system. That data would be utilized for, call it, a relatively short period of time, and then it would be archived in some sort of a more cost-efficient way, whether that be tape or otherwise. Now what's happening is that the value of data is changing, or the perception of the value of data is changing, such that it has to be maintained in a way that it can be accessed in a more efficient perspective going forward. And you also have to have that data secured from a reliable perspective. And so one of the things that we really want to make sure that we've got is we've got a full suite of products, both in terms of hard disk drives as well as SSDs, that can help satisfy those particular requirements. So just talking a little bit about the longevity of data, and I believe that this is something that will continue to evolve over time, and it really gets at the heart of big data analytics and the opportunity that that provides for all of us. Given the quote, ubiquitousness of data in terms of all of our lives and the vastness of that data, what's happening is that we are finding that unlike other assets, where those assets are, let's say, depreciating assets, the value of data arguably actually increases over time as you interact with more and more of it, as you analyze it, as you mine it differently. And so we continue to believe that having that data accessible in a more efficient manner will be very important. So we talk a lot internally about active archive systems, and we are working very hard on designing, some people call it cold storage applications and those sorts of things, very low cost spinning disk technology that allows all of us to store this data in a more efficient way while yet making it accessible when we need to access it in a way to extract the corresponding value from all of that data. I didn't click on the next slide, but it's self-explanatory. The other thing that's going on, so in addition to, one, the volume of data that is being created and the value of that data that's being created, I think there's a couple other specific trends that are going on from our perspective that require consideration. Some of them have been talked about here. The first thing is the growing influence of the cloud. You know, the cloud, however many years ago, not that long ago, was really considered to sort of be an emerging kind of a trend. And in a lot of cases, in some circles, it may still be considered an emerging trend. But interestingly enough, the workload from cloud-based systems this year will exceed the workloads from traditional data center applications. So the cloud now and going forward will be the dominant platform from an IT perspective. That has profound impact on us as a company in terms of a leading provider of data storage components to the industry, and it also has a profound impact on the broader ecosystem in terms of whether it be you as an IT professional or as a provider of services, products to the IT market. We need to be able to design solutions that are applicable not only in a traditional enterprise or data center application, but also service the changing or different workload structures from a cloud-based infrastructure perspective. The other thing is, and of course this is something that we all have talked about for a long time, is the growing importance of emerging markets. We estimate that by 2017, that the data created in emerging markets will exceed that of the developed markets. So emerging markets, one, have a larger population base and also are growing at a faster clip than developed markets. So what's the significance of that? The significance of that in terms of emerging markets is that emerging markets do not have the same tie to legacy-based systems or architectures. And in some cases they are, call it, skipping prior generations from an IT perspective. I mean, I've heard it said in terms of whether it be in China or otherwise, we've got a generation of individuals that may very well be skipping PCs as an example. And one can argue whether or not that's going to happen or not. But they are using different devices than many of us have as we grew up. So legacy ties to legacy systems doesn't exist to the same degree in emerging markets that it does in developed markets. So what that means to all of us, particularly the providers of products and services to the IT industry, and particularly for those that are on the front end of innovation, in that you know, and we run into this. We sell to legacy providers, customers, traditional customers, and we also have some emerging technologies that may be more disruptive to our traditional customers. And of course, there are startups and that sort of thing, particularly in the Valley, that are completely disruptive to legacy infrastructure providers. And so we believe that the emerging market opportunity is a great opportunity for those companies that are on the front end of the innovation wave and provide that opportunity to skip ahead, if you want to call it, in terms of legacy providers of IT systems. The other thing is, which is something that we take very seriously at Western Digital, and Tarkan talked about it in terms of our relationship with Nexenta, is that, and there's lots of different ways of saying this, but this changing ecosystem that we're looking at from an IT perspective is, one, creating, call it, strange bedfellows, and also old friends are becoming new enemies and that sort of thing. I mean, the relationships in the IT community are being jumbled up. Not necessarily because we want it to be that way, or not necessarily because we don't like this person or that person, but technology tends to be that way. It tends to be a little bit disruptive. And as Pat Gelsinger's talked about, you know, earlier, and I can't remember the exact quote, but we do not intend to be driftwood at the end of the day. And so what we have done is partnered with a number of different companies in a variety of different ways. On the one end of that extreme is obviously through acquisition. We've made a number of acquisitions over the last couple of years to broaden our portfolio from a product and from a technology perspective. And we've also partnered with a number of different companies in terms of joint development arrangements, equity kind of investments in terms of helping emerging companies from a technology perspective. That will continue to be an important part of what we do. We think it's an important part of what we should be doing, not just us as a company, but us as technologists within the IT infrastructure, to continue to find different ways of working together to innovate, to enable and broaden the use of technology, inevitably broadening the use of data from an overall value perspective. So it's a very interesting time from our perspective. We're actually, I think that arguably, not to editorialize too much, but at least in terms of my time in the technology world, I think that arguably we may be going through the most significant change. I do believe that's true from a storage perspective. We're very excited about it. We're very excited about being at the forefront from a technology perspective. A lot of people think that spinning disks, you know, I guess I would be considered an old technologist from that perspective. But we're certainly doing our best to continue to make our technology relevant and find new ways to innovate as a company by broadening our portfolio of products and services to our customers. So thank you for your time. It's great to be here.